Elizabeth Evans, and I'm a homeschooling mom of 4 young kids. I'm figuring this out as I go, but I'm here to talk to Bonnie, who has been writing and speaking on the subject for over a decade and has been homeschooling for 3 decades.
My name's Bonnie Landry. I've got 7 kids. They're ages 13 to 33. I've been homeschooling for 29 years. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandma. I'm a speaker and a writer, and I'm an advocate of joy. So we're here to provide this podcast so that homeschooling can look like you imagined it to be. So, hi, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's nice to meet one of your daughters.
I know. Yeah, this is really thrilling for me too. So this is my daughter, Lucy, for those of you who are listening. Lucy lives across the country from me with her family, and she's just on the brink of embarking on the whole homeschool career. So because she's here for a few weeks, we thought it'd be fun to have her on the show. So here she is.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Very fun. Okay, can you share your family dynamic, your kids' ages maybe?
Yes. So my oldest just turned 4, and he's really into learning. He wants to learn about absolutely everything. So I wasn't planning on really getting started with homeschool, anything sort of planned for at least until next year, maybe even a couple of years. But he's showing a lot of interest. So I'm starting to kind of think about, well, maybe we should spend 5 or 10 minutes sitting down and doing something a little bit more.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular that interests him? Reading, math?
He's really into numbers right now.
Okay.
So yeah, which is funny because I don't remember being into numbers as a little kid.
Yeah.
I liked math in high school, but yeah, he just is all about the numbers.
Okay.
So we'll be driving places and he'll say, "Mom, what's 4 plus 5?"
That's great.
Yeah, it's pretty cute.
Yeah, you can tell even here he likes to learn. He likes to draw. He likes shapes, and he likes to talk about things. So,
yes, and animals. All about the animal facts right now.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like my son. He just turned 6 today, but he wants to be a mathematician. He loves numbers. He remembers numbers.
That's great.
Well, we read a book. What was it called? I'll look it up, but it's about a famous mathematician, and he just loved the book.
Cool.
So, yeah.
That's pretty astute for a 6-year-old.
Yeah, he did 2nd grade math with his brother last year, and is going to move on to 3rd grade math this year.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's just proof. Again, we shouldn't slot people into a grade per se, right?
Yeah.
Because there's such a range of who will get things at what age, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to do like a bragging plug there at all, but I'm proud.
We're pretty judging you right now, actually. All right, should we get into some questions?
Yes, I have some questions, and Lucy, you said you have some questions also?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, she could just ask me on the phone, but
it's more fun to do it this way.
Well, we love having you, so.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to start off with just a really simple question, I think. With a child learning to write and spell, does copy work lead to dictation at all? And then there's some subset questions after that.
Sure. So I'm just going to sort of define these two things so that people understand the difference between copy work and dictation. So copy work is putting something in front of the child and having them copy it out the way they see it, right? Dictation is reading something out to the child and having them take it down with as much help as necessary for them to have it done correctly. That's my version of dictation. There are other approaches to dictation. So could copy work lead to dictation? Yes, technically I think it could. I'm not quite sure what the person's wondering about dictation in particular. But if you felt like the child was willing to do copy work and not willing to do dictation, then that might be a good lead in to dictation. It might be a good way to familiarize them with letters and with the symbols that are involved in language. But dictation is really where the learning all happens, right?
Yeah.
So you're getting exposure, but not necessarily the opportunity to look at language under a microscope.
Okay.
Right.
So some of the subsets of the questions is kind of twofold. Do spelling lists work at all? And then this question kind of relates back to the original one. Does short dictation work even if the child has no idea how to spell? So maybe that's where that first question originates.
Gotcha.
Is for somebody that doesn't know how to spell.
So spelling words. My kids in general are all really good spellers, except one who I stopped dictation with early because, you know, he was very, very academic in a math and science way, and he wanted to just move forward. So I thought, okay, this might be good to just let him do that. But in the end, you know, it didn't really help spelling, right? But in general, so I'm pretty convinced that dictation is a real aid to learning how to spell. Because I've never really done spelling lists with my kids, you know, from firsthand experience, I can't say, okay, that doesn't work. But from talking to other parents, what they know is that kids who have difficulty learning to spell will learn the list, do the test, and then promptly forget everything that was on the test, right? I used to think, I'm a naturally good speller, and I think several of my kids are as well, that spelling never was hard for me. However, I always assumed it was people who read were good spellers, and that's actually not true. I've met several people over the years who are really, you know, voracious readers and can't spell, okay? So just sort of looking at the cross-section of people that, you know, in my world, I've heard it many, many times said, yeah, we did a spelling list, the kids studied the words, and then forgot them as soon as they didn't need to know them anymore for the test, right? So I would say that that's not an awesome way to approach spelling. However, Andrew Pudewa has an amazing video that I would really recommend people getting, where he talks for an hour just about spelling. And he said basically what spelling is gathering random bits of information that don't really relate to anything. Right? In English in particular, you know, spelling, there's so many anomalies to the rules that spelling is really a memorization of random bits of information. So he said there's different ways that we can memorize random bits of information. One of them is repetitions, right? So over a long period of time, drip, 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 which dictation accomplishes, okay? The other thing is to people remember things when they were afraid, okay? And so he says, if you scare the child, that they will remember the spelling of something if you scare them, right? Like if a teacher yells at them or something like that, you know, not recommended in general.
Right.
But it is a way that we remember things. The other thing he said is find something funny about the thing you're trying to remember, the random bit of information, in this case, spelling. Find something funny about it, and then that will help you remember it. So that's also a tool I really used long before I heard that talk, but it made me realize why dictation works for spelling, is that I would make up silly little rhymes or silly little images for the kids, you know, like the word friend. I would say, well, you can remember because you fried your friend, right? So you can remember how to spell fried and friend.
I was going to mention that exact one. That one still sticks with me because of that little
so
humor,
use a bit of humor. And so when I listened to this talk, and it's outstanding as a talk, I don't know if you can get it for free on his website, iew.com, but it's worth buying. And even if you shared it with a couple of moms, you know, that were, you know, in your group or something, watched it together. Really, really good information, but it made me realize why dictation is so effective for spelling.
Okay.
And so he addresses that idea, as like why spelling lists aren't really the best way to learn to spell.
Right. Yeah, my mom taught me how to spell together by saying to get her, and it worked. I've never forgotten.
Right. Yeah. Well, who was it? Was it you who? One of my kids came up with their own way of remembering how to spell necessary. Was that you?
Necessary?
Necessary, right? Necessary. And I even do that sometimes when I'm spelling it, like, oh yeah, that's one of the words that trips me up. So necessary.
That's great.
So, so I remember, what was part 2 of that particular question?
Does short dictation work, like a short dictation, I think is what they mean, even if the child has no idea how to spell?
Yeah. So what's important to remember is that spelling is really one of the later skills we're starting to learn when we read, right? I mean, it's happening concurrently with reading, but spelling, if a child's learning dictation prior to being able to read or spell, what they're learning is letter sounds, letter formation, phonics, diphthongs, letters that go together, learning where to capitalize, how to actually form a letter with a pencil. And they're really, really learning how to read at that stage of the game, right? So some kids come into their dictation already having a bit of a handle on reading, but most of my kids learn to read via dictation, okay? So even if they don't know how to spell, there are many things to be learning, okay? Right. But I think the number one thing that children learn in dictation at that age is learning how to attend, right? Okay, just for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, however long you can get them to attend for, right? That's really the goal. And, I've mentioned this before, but we learn to attend by seeing somebody attend. So we're really modeling that. So this is where we want to shut our phone off or not be trying to load the dishwasher while they're finishing their word or whatever. We're attending for that few minutes. And that's the real value in dictation. You're teaching your child to attend by attending to them.
Right. You're also teaching spelling though within
Absolutely.
the context.
Yeah.
So whether or not they can spell or not spell doesn't really seem relevant because you're teaching spelling.
Exactly. So you're really primary spelling in the same way that you're not teaching math when your child plays hide and seek and you're teaching them how to count. You're not teaching math, but you are. Right. Well, so it's a good point. Yeah.
During our dictation episode, you shared one of your kids you did the same piece of dictation for like a year or something, right? And it was really what was it? I love mommy or something?
I love mama. So when Lydia started to doing dictation young because she's the youngest and she saw all her siblings doing it and it was, it's an enjoyable thing. Yeah. And so she wanted to do dictation. She was probably 4, maybe just turned 4. And I just said, well, what would you like to write? And she said, I would like to write, I love mama. And so she wrote that for about 6 months, but she would change the letters. Like she would make the letters really beautiful. And sometimes they would become animals or sometimes they become flowers or whatever. So she would change these beautiful fonts and wrote, I love mama in multiple different ways.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet.
It is sweet, right? But she was learning to attend and she's learning how to make those particular letters, right?
Yeah.
We did move on from those letters eventually.
Yeah.
There was no hurry, right? There was no hurry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Lucy, would you like to ask a question now?
Yeah, sure. So my question, and I know that you've dealt with this particular challenge before, in one of my siblings in particular, but it just so happens that I was kind of in high school and wasn't really present for the more one-on-one work that you were doing with said sibling. What are some tips and tricks for teaching a child who knows everything?
Oh, yes.
and will vehemently defend the facts that they know, whether or not they're
true. Okay, that's a great question. So at some point, reality does, sort of come into play. But for some children, that takes, years and years and years. So when the facts are malleable, I would never concede to the fact of something that wasn't an actual fact, but I would always feign surprise. So that was one of my tips, is like, wow, I have never heard that version of that before. Or wow, that must be a really interesting way of looking at the world. So yes, I've noticed this actually, that there's, that facts are fluid.
Yeah, right.
Such as, look at that beautiful arbutus tree. That's not an arbutus, it's a cedar. Well, everything I'm looking at looks like an arbutus, you know?
And you can also make a joke out of it. Something like, we did this a lot with said person, is like, oh my gosh, look, the bark is peeling off of this tree that you think is a cedar, just like an arbutus tree peels off. Wow, the leaves look so much like an arbutus. I thought for sure this must be an arbutus tree. So, that kind of joking around without actually, making it an issue where they're going to get bent out of shape about it, right?
Right.
Yeah, because those people get bent out of shape easily.
Yes. and I mean, at the age of 4, that's fine. But moving forward, when we get to 7, 8, and we're teaching facts, that it does matter whether they know the facts or not.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, what we did in that case was often just say, you know what, this is actually what happened. And, I appreciate you've got other information on that, but, just note it, just noted, we've actually, given you the correct information on that, and then leave it alone, because it's just one of those things that isn't worth having a fight about, right? But at the same time, you don't want them to have the upper hand in the sense that, oh, but you agreed that this was true. Well, no, of course I didn't. So probably by that age he'll be past that. But it's one of those things that for sure at 7 or 8, this particular child on mine was saying, no, that's the truth. And, we would have to say, well, it's actually not true, but, but it's not something to argue with you about. So let's move forward and go on to topic B.
Right.
Yeah.
We actually ran into that recently with playing a game. We got out a game we hadn't played in a couple months, and one child remembered the directions perfectly and the other was right.
Yeah. And sometimes you sadly have to go back to the source and say, look it up in the encyclopedia. Yeah. And again, I think that there's no point in saying, see, I told you so. Just like, oh, look at that. The encyclopedia says blah, right? Or, oh, look at that. The rule sheet says blah. So, that would be nice to play it that way, but I think we're going to follow the rules, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So related to that, kind of maybe getting to the root of that challenge, this is more about child rearing, but how do you think you can foster humility in your children? I mean, modeling obviously is the best option that comes to my mind, but are there other sort of ways that you can approach fostering humility in your children?
Right. Okay, so I'm just going to, for clarity's sake, for listeners, when the child, say, is wrong, or when they are misbehaving, or is there specific circumstances?
In general, I think.
In general, okay.
I see this sort of being right about things that they aren't actually right about.
Right.
Being a small glimpse at how a lack of humility might play out. But I'm wondering in general how you would foster humility in your children.
Right, yeah.
Which I think maybe can be more of a challenge when you're homeschooling, because you're both the parent and the teacher. Yeah. You don't have an external teacher who is the teacher, and the child just respects the teacher as the teacher.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we, the child we're referring to isn't the only child who, insisted that they were right about something, but certainly that was the go-to.
Yes.
That sometimes a private conversation, especially as they got older, private conversation, is that, this really affects your younger siblings when you insist that you're right about something, when the facts show that you're not. But certainly a private would be the way that we would have handled that, and also allowing ourselves to be wrong. Like if we're wrong about something, to be able to say, oh yeah, I looked that up and actually you were right about that, or actually, I was wrong about that, or whatever. So that was one thing. But private conversation, and even at bedtime, like, say, sometimes with kids like that who are kind of, kids like that tend to be sort of pig-headed, right? For lack of a better word. And so even once you've proved them wrong, right? And that's a sensitive issue. We have to go about that in a delicate way, because it's going to lead to greater pig-headedness in a sense, right? So, okay, we did this thing. We found out actually what the facts are, and so it sheds the light on that person being wrong. Okay. Yeah. And these are people who don't want to be wrong.
Right.
Okay. So first of all, sometimes finding out the facts outside of the circumstances, right? Like, actually, I know you were really adamant about that, but I did find this out. And so, here's the facts on that. And I mean, I have even experienced things like, well, the encyclopedia must be wrong.
Right.
And that, okay, well, you can think what you want. I'm not going to argue with you about it, but just know that the encyclopedia is saying something different than you were saying. So I think that's one way, but humility is rarely fostered by being direct, like directly calling someone out in a public way. Right. And even as adults, that's something that if we're adamant about something and we're wrong, we tend to want to defend ourselves as adults. Okay, well, because you're then, not only are you believe you're right, but you're also then embarrassed, right? So, of course we want to avoid embarrassment, but at the same time having to sort of say, actually, this is the way it is. So one of the things that we found probably the most helpful was saying, it's kind of giving bad example in a private way. It's giving bad example to your siblings to tell them X, Y, and Z, when those things aren't necessary to, or you're not necessarily sure of yourself. If you want to tell them something and you're not sure, then say, I think, blah, blah, blah. Preface whatever you want in I think, right? That way, you're not going to have to save face, right? It's not as hard to save face. If you say, I know, blah, 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 it's much different than saying, I think, right? So yeah. So public embarrassment, definitely not going to actually help growth and humility, right? But bringing it up privately, and that's hard too sometimes, but it does need to be done, right?
Yeah.
And also sorting out what's pretend, which of course at his age, a lot of it's pretend, right? But at 7, 8, 9, as they get older, it's no longer pretend. It's that I know, this. And what I found over the years is that people who, my own children included in this group, but excuse me, people who are really adamantly wanting to be right are really insecure. Right. And so, if we are kind of understanding of that, that this is an insecurity and that's why they have a need to be right so badly, that it maybe helps us sort of come alongside that particular problem better. But all my life, even people I knew when I was in my 20s, would meet people who were sort of, in a sense, like brassy or obnoxious or whatever. They were often the most insecure people that I knew. Right. And so that might help us in terms of dealing with our kids, right? Are those helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking my oldest has it's not officially diagnosed, but definitely ADHD. And so he does a lot of that kind of stuff, like makes those, claims and says they're true. And it can be really tough because it's not really coming from a place of insecurity. It's coming from just like, he thinks he knows these things, right? And he wants this, not power, that's not the right word, but I think he wants to feel like important, like,
Right. Yeah. I think that has played out for us in our family too. Like I want to be the guy, who knows the things, and I mean, that's hard. Those are sort of a bit of life's hard knocks. But again, calling them up publicly isn't going to help that. But, private conversation is going to be more helpful, although they still may be embarrassed. They still may be whatever. There's a great phrase that Gordon Neufeld uses. I've talked about Gordon Neufeld, the author of Hold On to Your Kids. And he says, when situations are happening, sensitive topics with kids, like something like this, or lying, or trauma, okay, he says, touch the wound, touch it and draw your hand back. So just like, well, you got really frustrated with me when I said that the encyclopedia said something different than you. And, maybe that felt a little bit embarrassing to you. And some kids are going to cry. Some kids are going to freak out. Some kids are going to ignore you. Right. But he said, just touch the wound. Right. And that's a really gentle way of being tender with a delicate situation, right? And that phrase has stuck with me a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. How did you teach differently based on gender? Or did you even teach differently based on gender?
I would say that, and I mean, this is very much strongly a boy-girl issue, but not always, okay? That I gave a lot of latitude for physical play in relationship to sit-down work. Okay. And so, the structure of my family, I had 3 girls, and then I had 3 boys, and then I had a daughter, right? Of my girls, Lucy was really, really physically active. She needed a lot of physical play. And this really came to light before I ever had boys. I remember reading out loud to the girls, and I said, Lucy was maybe, do you mind me sharing this? Yes. 4 or something. And I said, Lucy, sit still, sit still. I'm trying to read to you. And I said, you can't listen when you're, she was cartwheeling in the living room. And I said, and she goes, Mom, that's how I listen. Right. And I thought, oh, okay. I mean, I listen better when my hands are busy, actually, right?
Yeah.
Not all kids do, though. And it appears that kids are listening if they're sitting quietly, snuggled up against you or whatever. It's not always the case.
Right.
And it made me really rethink, like, okay, when I'm reading to them, I want to give them things to do, right? But in terms of, so my kids always had things to do when I sat with them. So I would say of my kids, Lucy definitely fit into sort of more of the boy framework, that she needed a lot of physical activity, sometimes just with her hands, Play-Doh or whatever while I was reading, but sometimes just getting out. And so for my boys, they would say, sit down and do dictation and math. And I mean, literally they're doing, 5 or 10 minutes of each thing. Then can we go out and kick the soccer ball around? Can we go out and play rollerblade? Can we, whatever? And I would say, yes, you got 20 minutes, you got half an hour. And so they would have a lot of physical activity. The girls required that less. Yeah. Lucy would climb trees. That was her main thing. She needed to get outside. I think that was really important. The girls, I would say, get outside every day. The boys had to be outside. Lucy had to be outside every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So partly a gender issue. So for sure, all my boys needed that. Yeah. Of my 4 girls, 3 of them, could have sat inside, or could have been more sedentary throughout the day. But Lucy definitely needed physical activity, right?
Okay.
And outdoor air,
Yeah.
And I know you've also mentioned this in an episode before, but with the boys, you did a lot more sort of visual, like you watched a lot more shows and movies and things like that.
Yeah, historical
movies.
Which we
didn't do as much when I was younger.
Yeah. And also I did a lot of projects with the girls. So when they were young, like those first, say 15 years of homeschooling, when the boys were still small, we did a lot of projects, right? And the girls really got jazzed about that. It was very exciting to work towards some sort of project, like, putting on a feast or putting on a play or putting on whatever. The era of boys, as the boys sort of became into their, teen and preteen years, and the girls were now, sort of done school, not the same. They just did not get excited about that in the same way. But they did get excited about movies. Like if we were doing a historical era, if we watched a historical movie or went out on a field trip, that was much better way of getting them jazzed. So I was kind of sad to see that era over. Yeah. But at the same time, you have to work with what is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Looks like I'm the flip. I've got the 3 boys and then I have a girl.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see what the next few years brings, right?
Right.
But I also think it might have been one of the advantages if my kids had been sprinkled like boy, girl, more sort of sprinkled around like that. There would have been less distinct eras, and maybe the girls' inclination to do projects might have rubbed off on the boys. Yeah. There were other great things about having the girls first, like the boys. I never, ever had to tell my boys to shower or wear deodorant or anything like that, like when they got to that age, because their sisters would be like, you smell. I hate it when boys smell. And it was just never an issue, right? The boys just, personal hygiene has never been a problem because they had 3 older sisters.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it was less us telling them like you stink, and more them just hearing us complain about the boys who are
The
our
teenage
age.
boys,
Like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
my brother hasn't showered in like 3 weeks, probably.
Yeah, and so that was like, it was great because I remember a friend of mine who had boys, you know, my boys' ages, and she was saying like, oh my gosh, like to try and make those kids have a shower, like I would actually have to sit them down and say, okay, listen, you are offensive, right? That just never happened in our family, right?
No,
And,
that's my kids now.
Yeah,
And they're 8,
I know.
6, and 4.
I know. Yeah, it'll get worse.
Yeah.
Sorry to break it to you.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, for sure, you know, having older sisters was very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's so
so, you know,
funny.
but I think that, you know, I felt like I really cherished those, you know, first, you know, 12 to 15 years of the girls and doing projects with them and doing the kinds of things that were very, I now look back and realize more sort of girl oriented. But I had that time with them because things definitely changed, you know, once we were into the boy era, right?
Yeah. Well, then, did you notice that like your boys needed more time to develop in their academic learning? Like, you know, the saying is that boys reach maturity later, you know, so did that kind of affect their schooling at all?
It can. And I think it's important maybe to separate out academics to maybe, you know, EQ, you know, emotional quotient sort of thing, like their ability to maybe socialize in an appropriate way or whatever. That because my first of my sons was really academically oriented, right? And a friend of ours actually said to us, let him run. So he was done everything he needed to do to graduate by 15, you know, and but I would say, so a couple of my sons are quite academic. One definitely, he's certainly academic now, but definitely took longer. I would say 2 to 3 years longer than his siblings to develop. But I would say the development of, I'm trying to find a phrase for it, but sort of social interaction definitely took a little longer. There was things with boys that I noticed, like boys would sort of like say maybe make jokes with adults that, you know, could have very easily been taken as it kind of insulting or pert or whatever. The girls had much more sensitivity to what was the, you know, appropriate way to interact with adults or peers for that matter. You know, and I would say that's something that took longer. So I think it depends on the kid. That's a big part of it. But I would say there's certainly something sitting down and doing work absolutely took longer. Even for my extremely academic son, definitely took longer to sort of have that be something, you know, like say 20 minutes would be a max. And then, you know, boom, I need to do something active before I can sit down again. Yeah. Did you have another question? Or a question from a friend?
I had, yes. So she didn't specifically ask me to ask this question, but it's something that we've been discussing.
Right.
I have a friend who English it's actually her third language. So she's from Argentina. So her first language is Spanish and her husband is Brazilian. So she also speaks Portuguese. And then English is her third language. They live in Canada now and are raising their children in an English-speaking country and community. And their children all speak English, but at home, they primarily speak Spanish and also Portuguese.
Cool.
So she's homeschooling her kids. Her oldest daughter is about 10. And so far, you know, they're loving it. They love homeschooling. They hope to continue homeschooling, but her fear is that because her own English isn't her first language, her English is very good, but it is definitely not her first language.
It's harder work. It's harder work, right?
Speaking, she does very well, but her writing is not as fluent or proficient. And she's concerned about homeschooling her children through high school because her own English is not proficient.
Right.
Do you have any commentary on that or suggestions of where to go for support or encouragement about continuing to homeschool through high school in a language that is not your
own,
primary
yeah.
language?
Well, yeah. Okay. So interestingly, I've had this question come up a few times. You know, we're a bilingual family. We speak French at home, or we speak Spanish at home, or whatever. And English is my second language. How do I approach this? I love the idea of not using curriculum, but how do I look at this? So there's been a few times this question has come up over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years, which I've just answered with a kind of a standard answer. That first of all, do dictation in all the languages, so both languages or all 3 languages in her case. Okay, so maybe 1 week in English, 1 week in Portuguese, 1 week in Spanish. Vary the languages, find sources, they probably have them, you know, kids books in Spanish, kids books in Portuguese, kids books in English, so that you can use those things for dictation, right? And so through that, not only is the child going to learn the written language skills of those languages, but I think you would too as the mother, right?
So here's my question. As the mother, if you don't know the names of the parts of speech in English,
Right,
and what different grammatical techniques are called in English, or, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
English, sort of
Grammar and punctuation.
grammar and punctuation, and the theory behind it. How do you teach that through dictation if you yourself don't even know it? That,
well,
or someone who's just not good at English.
Yeah.
Some people really struggle, like some people struggle with math. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you teach something that
you're not utterly familiar with?
Especially in a method like dictation, where it's very organic.
Right.
You kind of have to have the knowledge.
This is the question that I can't tell you how many times I've had this question, because most people, I have had people who have come and they have masters in English, right? They are English teachers, okay? And they're going to homeschool their kids, and they don't know some of the basic tenets of how to teach something at that level, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is really common. So when my first probably 5 or 6 years of doing dictation, I didn't know those things either. I had at the time, I had a little paperback dictionary that had all the grammar and usage and punctuation rules in the first, 10 or 20 pages of the dictionary. I kept it beside me 100% of the time, so that as soon as we came up, like, oh, what do those 2 dots mean? Oh, well, let's look that up. That's a colon. Oh, and the reason they've used it is, what are the reasons you use a colon? Oh, look at that, right? So I literally learned along with my kids. And it's such a good question, because now those things come easy. But in the first few years, I really had to be learning along with my kids, okay? And so, and I would say 90% of the questions that I get about this come from English-speaking, highly educated parents mm-hmm. who are saying, I should know this stuff, mm-hmm. right? Like, I did a paragraph writing class as a master class a month or so ago. And one of the moms had a PhD, mm-hmm. right? And she said, why didn't I learn how to write a paragraph like this before I, started my university education, right? Yeah. Unbelievable, like highly, highly educated people who have figured it out along the way. But wouldn't life have been so much easier if they had the absolute basics down rock solid before they entered into essay writing and that sort of thing, right?
Right.
So so I have several things on my Pinterest page. One is called Dictation. It's just helps for dictation. Mm-hmm. And there's really clever moms out there who've done like posters of parts of speech, posters of punctuation, posters of grammar rules. I'm going to do this. Like, some of them are printable, some of them you have to pay for, but I have lots of those on my Pinterest page because there's many talented people. I like doing graphics, and one of my little projects right now is, it'll probably be the end of the summer before I actually get them done, but to develop those pages for people just starting homeschooling. Mm-hmm. Okay, when do I capitalize? When do I punctuate? What grammar rules do I need to know? So kind of the very basic stuff, mm-hmm. So that they can just make it a printable, like the planning pages, just make it a printable that they can print out from my website. So that is something I'm working on right now, okay. Because probably in 4 or 5 pages, just printed out pages. You could either put them up on your wall so you can refer to them, or keep them in a little duotang beside your desk so that you can refer to them with your child. But that should not, a humility question, right? Don't be afraid to sit there and, wow, I don't know, let's look that up, right? It's really important that we learn to do that with our kids, and we end up learning something really, really well because of it, right? So I would say for the non-English speakers, the same thing is like, wow, like when I see question marks in Spanish, and they put a question mark at both ends of the sentence, it's like, excuse me? But if I had a Spanish, something that just explained that to me, this is how you do this, right? That would be really helpful in the learning of Spanish, right? This is how you do this. So I think that that's something that we need to just be prepared to learn alongside our child about, but have some really good resources. So Pinterest page, there's a book my daughter has that's fantastic called The Usborne Book of Grammar and Punctuation. So it's built for students, probably grades 3, 4, 5, middle school years, but really helpful as a mom to have sitting beside you. This is when we use a period. This is when we capitalize. This is when we do this, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
As you're explaining that, it's making me remember a book that I really loved in high school for that same purpose, but it was Strunk & White's The Elements of Style.
Yes, absolutely.
And
certainly as they get older.
When they get older, But I'll have to look at that Usborne book.
Yeah, for your kids your age, absolutely fantastic. Just to have sitting beside you, right?
Yeah.
And you could actually read it as one of those, I always talk about sort of reading something for 5 minutes before you start your novel.
Yeah.
That would be a terrific book. If I had had it 10 years ago, I would have used it as a, oh, look at this, just as a point of discussion.
Yeah.
But really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, we're coming up on time. Do we want one more question or save it for
Ooh, we are.
later?
Should we do one more?
Yeah.
You up to it? Yeah, let's do one
Okay. This might be a loaded one, so you can add it on to next episode. What are your thoughts on sticker charts, stamps, or prizes for toddlers and young children, specifically for behavior?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a loaded question.
Mm-hmm.
I am two things. I'm not going to judge parents for using sticker charts, okay? I don't think they're necessary, and I don't think they're helpful, right? Some kids, yes, will get jazzed about, okay, I get to put my sticker on whatever. In most cases, I have not found that sort of thing to be helpful. Mm-hmm. In terms of gaining cooperation, mm-hmm. Okay? So when we want to gain cooperation from our child, I'm going to point in a direction. Okay, so this whole idea, we've talked about this before, but this whole idea of rewards and consequences, okay? Yeah. By the way, a few people have signed up for a class that was supposed to be this coming Saturday. They've been contacted, anyone who signed up for it, but lots of interest, but the summertime problem of lots of people having company or having plans or whatever. So we bumped it to September 5th, okay, which I'll put in the show notes and I'll put on Facebook. So it's a kind of carrot and stick talk, okay? What, if not carrot and stick, then what, okay? So stickers and check mark boxes and all of that definitely falls into the carrot and stick category. In the younger years, that can seem like a really harmless paradigm, okay? Mm-hmm. Except as they get older, you have to bump up, with most kids, you have to bump up the rewards and consequences in order to gain the same cooperation. Mm-hmm. And it's the same story of it. At some point, really, do you really want to be threatening them with, you can't go hang out with your friends, or you can't eat dinner with us, or you can't whatever. Do we really want to be addressing rewards and consequences in that way with our older children? And that is how you're forming them. When you're starting with sticker charts, that is the formation that you are planning as a parent, right? So you're laying a foundation that you may not want to be dealing with later on, okay? Mm-hmm. So big topic. So I'm going to make some recommendations. If you have a little bit older kids, I would say 8 or 10 and up, hold on to your kids, a fantastic resource. Not necessarily, it's not a hard book to read, but I would say it's not gripping in the same way that, you know, some parenting books would be, but the content is invaluable. And also Judy Arnall's books, Discipline Without Distress. Actually, any of Judy Arnall's books on discipline are fantastic. And sort of the guide in the back is, okay, when my child is doing this behavior, what do I do, right? Instead of, if rewards and consequences aren't the option I'm looking for, what do I do, right, to gain their cooperation? So those are some resources. But if you really want to delve into this topic more, I'm doing a couples class on September 5th about the idea of carrot and stick and what we will be doing in that masterclass, sort of just delving into that in a big way.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
All right.
Is that a wrap?
Yeah, that's a wrap.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll say goodnight.
Yes. It was nice meeting you, Lucy.
Yeah, you too, Elizabeth.
You'll have to come back or just hop on Zoom sometime.
I know. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, she's here for like 4 more Thursdays. So.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I could become a regular.
I know. She's
Yeah. I love it.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.